Difficult conversations not your thing? Then you're in the right place. Hi, my name is Mark and I'm from Umo Finance, and we are property and business finance specialists. Some of the challenging conversations that are happening at the moment are not for everybody. Some people deal with them and cope with them better than others. We thought we'd catch up with Kate of Bespoke Skills, who's going to take the time to talk us through some of the best practices on dealing with difficult conversations.
Hi Kate, thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us today. Many business owners are facing and dealing with significant challenges at the moment, and they're likely to do so for quite some time. That means they'll also be having some very difficult conversation with team members, clients, suppliers, etc., just to name but a few. What guidance do you have to try and make those conversations a bit less daunting?
I think the thing about difficult conversations is that it's usually around something that you feel a bit nervous about. And what you have to do is, first of all, take some time to plan. And in that planning, it's really about thinking about the other person. So sometimes when we get nervous about having conversations, it's about what we're going to say and the reaction of somebody else. But if we try to get into their shoes and understand it from their perspective, it means that we will plan better. So that works for both working with clients and also with your own staff teams. So I would say plan. And what that planning also means is making sure that if you are at home, making sure that your family know that you're wanting to have some quiet time, making sure that nobody's going to disturb you so that you can hold the space, which is the second thing, really making sure that you're holding the environment so that you can truly listen to that other person. Because if people don't feel heard, that's where sometimes that it can escalate into anger. So holding the space is really important and planning for that. And the next thing is, once you know your starting place of how you want to start the conversation, and you know roughly what you want to say in the conversation, and you've created your space, the next thing is when you start the conversation to have some kind of confidentiality contract between you. So people know, who's going to hear about this, who's going to how open they can be with you. So that confidentiality is really important to make people feel safe, especially if some of the stuff's going to be quite difficult in the long run. The fourth thing really is around how much you know that person. If you have built up a good relationship with them over time, if you've been doing constant check-ins, then difficult conversations are easier. So I would say that even if you're not having difficult conversations now, it's really important for you to think about making sure that you're building the relationships up with those both customers and staff, to make sure that when those difficult conversations ever do arise, they're easier with those check-ins. And the thing that you do at the very beginning of a conversation is you first of all think about them. And the way that you do that is by asking open questions, making sure that you've sort of checking in with them. How are they feeling at the moment? What's going on with them at the moment? Because if you know that they've been going through a particularly hard time during this lockdown, or a particularly hard time in their family environment, the timing of the difficult conversation might not be now. And timing is so key with difficult conversations. We usually can work that out in the office environment, but in the online environment, it's a little bit more tricky. So you've got to make sure that you have that first conversation. How are you? How are things going at home? How are you getting on with stuff? So that you can find out where they're getting to. And the next bit really is to think about when you do start the conversation and you work out where they're at, making sure as time goes on, sort of repeating what they've said, using their words, not yours, so that you're clarifying that you're understanding what they're saying, you're validating what they're saying, and that means that you can move forward into what your ideas are. And then you can state your own position from it. Because sometimes, let's face it, we all want to do the best for our staff and for our clients, but sometimes there's things that we can do, and sometimes there are just things that we can't do at the moment. So being really clear about what your position is, if now is the right time, is key. And the other thing that I feel really passionate about is that we sometimes feel when we're in difficult conversations, we're all tense and all worried and everything like that. And we set ourselves up for debate or, having that kind of like aggressive kind of situation. If we feel calm, if we feel prepared, and if we open our hearts, of want of a better word, to be more compassionate and have more of a dialogue, so that we're both trying to find the best outcome, not trying to take sides, then we're going to get to a place where we can actually converse with each other and get to the best solution for all. And the way that we do that is by noticing little triggers that people might have. And those triggers might be, noticing changes in their body language or tone. They're little tells. And if we can see any of those tells, it might be that we need to pull back a little bit. And, finishing having the conversation, really knowing roughly before you start how you want to finish. And my key message is really know the people that you're talking to, know them, ask them what they want from the conversation, and then act for them in the future so that you can build trust. And that acting for them might also be about being clear about the difficult things that you might have to do as well. So they're the kind of like 10 key points that I think are quite useful to think about when you're having those difficult conversations.
Oh, really useful. I think in regards to the conversation around how to know if it's the right time to speak to them. Obviously, you may have just picked up the phone. It may not just be a case of their work environment. May just have had the children running around, perhaps highly stressed because that's not worked out so much. But also there's a challenge from business owners where some messages need to be delivered in a time-critical manner. How would you propose then that you balance the empathy and the understanding of the individual that you're going to speak to versus actually this message might not be able to wait?
Yeah, it's really interesting that. In fact, when you look at emotional intelligence, there's a dichotomy between a very strong decision maker and empathy. So if you're a very quick decision maker, you tend to have less empathy. So you usually need to either work on one or the other. I would say if it's time critical and you know that person is going through a hard time, it's about how you structure your language around it. And an awful lot of that is around the clarification, validation, and saying things like, I understand this might be difficult for you. However, this is something that can't wait. I hope you understand it from my point of view. And making sure, the other things that I was talking about, making sure that you're in the right emotional state so that you can deal with any anger that might be coming at you. You might be dealing with any triggers, emotional triggers that are coming at you, and that you can deal with them in a very, the sort of terminology is in a very adult way so that you can support them, sometimes we can't do anything about it. If we've got to get into a deadline, we've got to get into a deadline. But it's like your approach, your body language, your tone. I'll give you an example. Sometimes when somebody is angry at us, we naturally are angry back because we mirror each other. But the better way to deal with anger or upset is to match the pace of the other person so they feel as if you're listening, but change the tonal quality. So rather than mirroring their tonal quality, you're using a more gentle tone, but you're showing the pace of the importance by matching their pace. And that can be quite a useful thing to practice over time.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of challenging conversations, both with staff, clients, suppliers, where people are having to cancel orders. It's in a very emotive time. People are feeling the pressure themselves personally as well as financially. So I think these are great tips, and just not shying away ultimately from the conversation. The longer you leave it, the more difficult it's going to become to have that conversation in the first instance, and the more it'll build up, I guess, in your own mind as to how difficult that conversation is going to become. So also dealing with it as quickly as possible.
I also think there's a really interesting point there, Mark, because I think there's also a thing about we sometimes think that no, or we can't do that, or negative is a bad thing. But actually, what we've got to realize is that it might be no now, but everything is changing all the time, and so let's keep in touch is a great way to sort of, and do actively, as I said, know them, ask them, and act for them. Keep in contact with people that you might have had said. Sometimes you can't with furlough and things like that, but if you can keep in contact with people, keeping the door open even when you've had a conflict or a difficult discussion means that you can build the relationship from those difficult conversations. I often find that my best relationships with people are people that I've gone through hard times with, because you know that if you know that they'll be there for you. It is the time where you build relationships in difficult conversations, and it's about how you manage them well, using some of the tips that we just talked about.
Yeah, fantastic. No, and I really appreciate the insight. As you say, there's a sort of a high level conversation around this. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your insight into it. And I look forward to catching up with you very shortly. Thank you very much.
Lovely to talk to you.
Great, thank you very much for that. Really great insight there, and some great tips and ideas there on how to deal with some difficult and challenging conversations. Just wanted to recap on a couple of the areas that stood out for me. Firstly, put yourself in their shoes, show empathy, understand that these aren't straightforward conversations and emotions will likely run high. Plan. Make sure you give yourself the time and space to have the conversation. Just don't go running into it as soon as you think it's time. Hold the space, making sure that people feel that they're being heard, just so that they don't feel as though they're being spoken at and actually having a conversation with. Probably the best way to avoid a conversation becoming more challenging than it needs to be is just to frequently check in with your team, clients, etc. That way then you can deal with any issues in a timely manner. Timing is really, really important. Sometimes the decision or the conversation is time critical, so you don't have the luxury of time, but wherever possible, try and judge your timing to the best of your ability. Knowing your outcomes, knowing what you want to achieve from the conversation, and trying to make sure that both parties are understanding of where that needs to be. And there we go, some really useful tips and guidance on how to deal with difficult situations. I'm sure many of us will be having them over the coming months. Hope you found that useful, and we'll see you next time.